Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. We also have a ton of brand new t-shirt designs in stock, so make sure you check out those as well. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG Player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all of their support. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in from the Commander's Core studio. Welcome to the show. So, during spoiler season, there are definitely commanders out there that some people, well, maybe ignore when they shouldn't, like Satsuki the Living Lore, which I am urging you, please do not sleep on this commander because it can do some really powerful and exciting things. So if you haven't seen that episode, make sure you check it out at some point, but not before you watch this episode on Hinata, Crown of Dawn. And yeah, unlike Satsuki, I don't think many players are going to be sleeping on this one because this commander is absolutely broken. I mean, at first, when you see it, you might think, okay, that's pretty powerful, but the more and more that you dig into it, the more and more broken Hinata becomes. So, what does this commander do, and what makes it so broken? Well, let's jump into it to find out. First off, a big thank you to MTG Goldfish for the translated version of this card. Hinata Crown of Dawn is a 4/4 Spirit Kirin that has flying and trample, and it costs 1 blue, red, white. Notably, I believe that this is the second 3-color commander from this set, and we maybe have a cycle going on here, but we will have to see. Regardless, it says spells you cast cost 1 less to cast for each of their targets. On top of that, spells your opponents cast cost 1 more to cast for each of their targets. Again, at first, like me, when you read this card, you might just be thinking, okay, yeah, that seems pretty good. But then the more and more that you think about it, and the more cards that you actually look up for it, you're like, oh my goodness, this card can do some incredibly brutal and busted things for basically no mana. And again, on top of that, the reverse is kind of true, where your opponents have to pay 1 more for each of their targets, and yeah, that is an incredibly brutal and just devastating effect when it comes to opponents trying to cast anything that targets. I mean, if it only targets one thing, sure, okay, now instead of your Path to Exile being just 1 mana, now it's 2. Obviously, that additional taxing effect makes a difference, but when it comes to cards that target multiple things, and there's quite a few out there that I'm going to be highlighting in this episode that, you're benefited when you're casting them, but your opponents have to pay an absurd amount to just cast spells that, normally wouldn't cost anywhere near as much. So yeah, I feel like maybe at first this commander might not get the most hate at the table, but after players see what it can actually do, there's going to be a giant target on this commander's back the second that it comes down. And again, when the target is on its back, in order to actually get rid of it, you're going to have to pay more to actually get rid of it when you cast a spell that targets it. But yeah, to me, this is a card that is most definitely going to see play as a commander. It's interesting, it utilizes cards in a different way, and yeah, it can be really, really powerful. And it's actually somewhat reminiscent to another commander. And that would be the incredibly brutal commander, Grand Arbiter Augustin IV. It's a 2/3 human advisor for 2 white-blue that says, white spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, blue spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, and spells your opponents cast cost 1 more to cast. Now, this commander doesn't see a ton of play because, well, it's one of the saltiest commanders out there, and yeah, players really don't enjoy playing against stacks. At least, or I should say, most casual players don't enjoy playing against stacks. I know that there are definitely players out there that do, and that's great, but for the most part, you probably don't want to just bring this to your LGS. But yeah, Hinata is definitely not as brutal in some ways. Again, it doesn't affect, all spells, only ones that target, but it can make certain spells, ones that target multiple things, not impossible for your opponents to guess, but incredibly taxing to do so. And of course, on top of that, again, the cost reduction can be even more impactful for something that targets, more than 2 things. Regardless, now let's move on and talk about the possibilities and possible cards you might want to consider for a deck built around Hinata. First up, in just an easy example, even something as simple as, say, Disenchant for you, an instant that can destroy target artifact or enchantment that usually costs 1 and a white, now just costs 1 mana. But just think about a card like Crush Contraband. I mean, it's an instant that says choose one or both exile target artifact or exile target enchantment, and it usually costs 3 and a white. But for you, again, if you choose an artifact and an enchantment, it's only going to cost you 1 and a white, 2 mana to exile 2 things. That is absolutely absurd, but of course nowhere near the most absurd thing that we can do with this commander. And on the other hand, and again, Crush Contraband is a fantastic removal spell that sees a ton of play in Commander. If your opponent tries to cast it and target 2 things, that spell is going to cost them 5 and a white, 6 mana. So the impact that this commander has on a single spell on both sides is a 4 mana difference. You only have to pay 2 and your opponents have to pay 6. And actually, just a clarification for how this actually works, and please, rules lawyers in the comments below, correct me if I'm saying this wrong, but basically, before paying the cost of a spell, you are choosing your target, so essentially it's going to reduce or add based on your choice before you pay. And which that will come into play for a lot of other cards coming up, but I just want to bring that up now. Anyways, Aether Gale, a spell that is already fantastic and costed appropriately, a sorcery for 3 blue that bounces 6 target non-land permanents back to the runner's hands. Now for you, this just costs what, blue? Obviously, with 6 targets, it's going to reduce the cost by 6, but it can't, do entirely 6 because it only has 3 generic mana, so it reduces that 3 completely. And yeah, you're paying blue, 2 mana to bounce 6 things. That is absurdly efficient, and again, on the other end, if your opponents try to cast an Aether Gale, good luck to them. Because in order to cast it, they're going to have to pay 9 blue. That's right, 11 mana in total to bounce 6 permanents. Yeah, this commander is pretty absurd, and things are only going to get more absurd from here. One of the first keywords that I thought about when I saw this commander was Strive. And of course, we can see Strive on cards like Twin Flame, Call the Coppercoats, and Launch the Fleet. Twin Flame is a sorcery that costs 1 in a red, but it's got a Strive cost of 2 in a red, so basically it's going to cost 2 in a red more to cast for each target beyond the first. It says choose any number of target creatures you control. For each of them, put a token that's a copy of that creature onto the battlefield. Those tokens have haste, exile them beginning the next end step. So essentially, usually this would be pay 2 to make 1 copy, pay 5 to make 2, pay 8 to make 3, so it definitely ramps up pretty quickly in cost. But with Hinata in play, first of all, this spell is just going to cost a single red mana, and then on top of that, it's going to be basically Strive for 1 in a red instead of 2 in a red. So you can target a lot more things a lot more efficiently, and yeah, get a ton of token copies of your creatures, temporary tokens, but they can still be very impactful. And speak of impactful, Call the Coppercoats is an instant for 2 and a white, and it says this spell costs 1 and a white more to cast for each target beyond the first. Choose any number of target opponents, create X 1/1 white human soldier creature tokens, or X the number of creatures your opponents control. Now this card is already extremely efficient, essentially being able to make you an army out of nowhere for not much mana, but again with Hinata in play, it costs even less. Not only is the actual cost of the card just going to be 1 in a white, instead of 2 in a white, but the Strive cost is going to be a single white mana instead of 1 in a white. So yeah, you're basically, if you've got 3 opponents, that's what, 2 mana plus, 2 more mana, so that's 4 mana in total. 4 mana in total to instant speed make a ton of human soldier tokens out of nowhere. And of course, the final card I want to mention is Launch the Fleet, and this one's actually really funny because it doesn't see all that much play in Commander, but with this commander, I can definitely see it making an impact. It's a sorcery for a white, and it has a Strive cost for a single generic mana. It says, until end of turn, any number of target creatures each gain whenever this creature attacks, put a 1/1 white soldier creature token onto the battlefield, tapped and attacking. So typically, again, you'd have to pay 1 mana for every single target beyond the first, so basically, 1 mana for every creature that you actually want to get a token for. But now with this commander, that just negates that cost completely, the Strive cost that is, so essentially, you pay a single white mana just to actually cast the card, and now, for every single one of your creatures, you get a creature token that's tapped and attacking when they attack. Again, the potential for this commander is just absurd with certain cards. Another keyword that came to mind when I saw this commander was Multi-Kicker, which we can see on Comet Storm and Marshal's Anthem. Comet Storm is an instant for X red and has Multi-Kicker 1. Choose any target, then choose another target for each time this spell was kicked. Comet Storm deals X damage to each of them. So typically, to pick more and more targets, obviously you'd have to pay for that Multi-Kicker a lot to, just pick as many targets as you need. But again, Hinata essentially just does that for you for free. So dump whatever amount of mana into that X. I mean, basically it's going to be what, X minus 1 because of the targeting as well. And then multi-kicker 1 doesn't matter. You can just put any number of targets that you want because Hinata is essentially paying for that 1. So this can easily be a one-sided board wipe that can also ping your opponents in the face for a ton. And then Martial's Anthem is another example of a multi-kicker spell that can be impacted by Hinata. It says, multi-kicker for 1 and a white, creatures you control get +1/+1, and when it enters the battlefield, return up to X target creature cards from your graveyard to the battlefield, where X the number of times Martial's Anthem was kicked. So you can get a ton of savings and reanimate a lot more creatures with this Anthem. And speaking of savings, well, let's talk about some really absurd cards with this commander, like By Force, Heliod's Intervention, and Curse of the Swine. By Force is a sorcery that costs X and a red, and it says destroy X target artifacts. So this already can be a great way to actually wipe out a good amount of artifacts, but with this commander, the effect is insane. Essentially, this is, hey, pay a red mana, destroy all of your opponent's artifacts. Eat your heart out, Vandal Blast. But an even more absurd play has got to be with Heliod's Intervention, an instant for X white that says choose 1. Destroy X target artifacts and or enchantments, or target player gains twice X life. Now that twice X life, cool, that's great. Who cares? Destroy any number of artifacts and or enchantments for just white at instant speed. One-sided enchantment artifact board wipe for 2 mana at instant speed. Yeah, again, I think it's going to be pretty hard for players out there to argue that this commander is not incredibly powerful when they bring it to the table and do something like this. Or, how about Curse of the Swine, a sorcery for X blue that says exile X target creatures. For each creature exiled this way, its controller creates a 2/2 green boar creature token. So again, for just blue, you exile all your opponent's creatures and replace them with 2/2s. A 2 mana, one-sided board wipe. And again, just think about the opposite end of these cards. If your opponents try to cast a Heliod's Intervention and they're trying to take out artifacts and or enchantments, they're going to have to pay a ton. Essentially, just to destroy 1 artifact and or enchantment, they've got to pay 4 mana in total. And again, if they want to destroy 2, that's 6. So this can really hamper your opponents and make it so that you're just having an absurd amount of savings on your end. Some other fun cards to highlight, well, at least for you, are Distorting Wake, Dance of the Manse, and Disorder in the Court. Distorting Wake is a sorcery that says return X target non-land permanents to their owner's hands for X blue. So again, essentially, pay blue, 3 mana in total, and bounce all non-land permanents that you don't control. I mean, I guess you can bounce some of your things if you want, but yeah, this is basically 3 mana, sorcery speed, Psych Rift now. And then Dance of the Manse is another interesting one. It's a sorcery for X white-blue, and it says return up to X target artifact and or non-aura enchantment cards, each with converted mana cost X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. If X is 6 or more, those permanents are 4/4 creatures in addition to the other types. Essentially, hey, for just white-blue, 2 mana in total, return all of your artifact and non-aura enchantment cards from your graveyard, as long as they meet that converted mana cost requirement, but yeah, return them all to the battlefield. And then Disorder in the Court can lead to a very spicy play for you. It's an instant for X white-blue, and it says exile X target creatures that investigate X times, return the exile card to the battlefield tapped on their arm's control at the beginning of the next end step. So for white-blue, at instant speed, 2 mana, you can exile any number of creatures you want and investigate that many times. So obviously you can utilize this as like a temporary, hey, everyone else's creatures are gone, I'm just going to swing through, and also, get a ton of, clue tokens because of that investigating. So that seems pretty powerful. Or, just before your turn being like, hey, I'm just going to pay 2 mana and investigate an absurd amount of times, and my opponent's creatures are going to be tapped when they come back in. I mean, so are mine, but then it's going to be my turn and I untap. Yeah, there's a lot of crazy things that you can do with this commander. I mean, even a card like Reality Spasm becomes incredibly powerful out of nowhere with this commander. It's an instant for X blue, and it says choose 1, tap X target permanents, or untap X target permanents. So I mean, this can be either tap every single permanent your opponents control, including their lands, for blue at instant speed. Or of course, untap all of your permanents at instant speed for just blue. I mean, Turnabout is an incredibly powerful card, but this just laughs in the face of Turnabout with this commander. I mean, even double X spells like Release the Gremlins and Mass Manipulation are going to be heavily impacted by this commander as well. Release the Gremlins is a sorcery for XX and a red, and it says destroy X target artifacts, create X/2/2 red gremlin creature tokens. So again, you can essentially just basically knock one of those X's off the cost, and this becomes X red, and yeah, you can destroy a ton of artifacts and create a ton of tokens much more efficiently. And then Mass Manipulation is a sorcery for XX blue 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 blue, and it says gain control of X target creatures and or planeswalkers. So normally it would cost you basically 2 mana to gain control of a target creature or planeswalker, but in this case now you're just paying 1 for each of them, which is incredibly powerful, and yeah, this can definitely be a game-ending card in this deck. Some other kinds of cards that you're going to want to consider are ones that benefit you when you cast massive spells with things like Meldrick Summonings, Sunbird's Invocation, and Zephi Thunder Conductor. Meldrick Summoning says whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, create an XX colors construct artifact creature token where X is that spell's mana value. Again, keep in mind that with something like, say, Reality Spasm, where you can target, essentially every single permanent on the board that you want to target, the converted mana cost of the card when you actually cast it is going to be incredibly high. I mean, if your opponents have, say, 30 permanents in play and you target all 30 of their permanents with that, that is what, a 32 converted mana cost spell, and now you get a 32/32 construct just for casting that spell when you essentially only paid 2 mana for it. I mean, think about the implications with Sunbird's Invocation. It's an enchantment for 5 and a red, and it says whenever you cast a spell from your hand, reveal the top X cards of your library where X is that spell's mana value. You may cast a spell with mana value X or less among the cards revealed this way without paying its mana cost, but the rest of the bottom of your library in a random order. Again, if you cast that Reality Spasm for essentially, what, a 32/32 mana value, you basically just dig through your deck and cast whatever you want for free. And then you're going to have an absolute blast with Zephi in play. It has Magecraft. Whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, scry 1. If the spell's mana value is 5 or greater, create a 4/4. If the spell's mana value is 10 or greater, Zephi is going to deal 10 damage to an opponent chosen at random. Again, it's not going to be hard for you to cast a ton of spells, with the mana value of 5 or 10, so have fun making a ton of tokens and dishing out a ton of random damage to your opponents. I mean, even just think about spells that you choose any number of targets like Eerie Interlude, Semester's End, and Paradoxical Outcome. Eerie Interlude says, exile any number of target creatures you control, return those cards to the battlefield under their owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. Now this is an instant that would normally cost you 2 and a white, and yeah, it's already a fantastically costed card. It can save your entire team for just, 3 mana, but with this commander, as long as you pick 2 targets, it costs a single white mana to save your entire team. So obviously the same can be said with Semester's End, which is very similar, an instant for 3 and a white that says exile any number of target creatures and or planeswalkers you control. At the beginning of the next end step, return each of them to the battlefield under its owner's control. Each of them enters with an additional +1/+1 counter on it if it's a creature, and additional loyalty counter on if it's a planeswalker. So again, for just a single white mana, exile essentially, 3 or more creatures, and yeah, they all come back even bigger. And then just think about the implications of a card like Paradoxical Outcome. It's an instant for 3 and a blue, and it says return any number of target non-land, non-token permanents you control to their owner's hands. Draw a card for each card returned to your hand this way. So again, basically pay a blue mana, instant speed, bounce a ton of your things back to your hand to draw a ton of cards. Yeah, that sounds good. And a big thank you to my play group for pointing out some of these next few, but yeah, Sublime Epiphany, Magma Opus, and Soulfire Eruption are definitely the last 3 that I want to cover with this commander. Sublime Epiphany is an instant for 4 blue, and it says choose 1 or more. Counter target spell, counter target activator triggered ability, return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand, create a token that's a copy of target creature you control, target player draws a card. Pay blue, do all those things? That's an absurdly overpowered counterspell with this commander. And then Magma Opus is an instant for 6 blue, red, and it says it's going to deal 4 damage divided as you choose among any number of targets, tap 2 target permanents, create a 4/4 blue and red elemental creature token, draw 2 cards. So as long as you pick separate targets, this just cost you blue-red, 2 mana to instant speed do all of that. But then there's Soulfire Eruption, a spell that would normally cost you 6 red, so 9 mana in total. It says, choose any number of target creatures, planeswalkers, and or players. For each of them, exile the top card of your library, then Soulfire Eruption deals damage equal to that card's converted mana cost to that permanent or player. You may play the exile cards until the end of your next turn. Essentially, as long as your opponents have, 3 creatures in total that you want to target with this, you are paying red to target your opponents, all of their creatures, and then you just get a ton of cards off the top of your library that you can then cast until the end of your next turn, and you can dish out a lot of random damage with this. Yeah, the possibilities on this commander are just insane. But now it's time for me to wrap things up and give you my final thoughts on Hinata Crown of Dawn. Yeah, again, this is the type of commander I believe that when you first look at it, it's like, okay, that seems pretty good. And then the further and further you delve into it, the more and more absurd and absurdly broken this commander can be. This commander is incredibly efficient with some spells that, well, are already efficient, but then become just brokenly efficient with the amount that it can save you. Again, just think about Heliod's Intervention. I still really can't get over, just how bonkers that is with this commander. White, instant speed, destroy all artifacts and enchantments you don't control. And on the other hand, again, if your opponents are trying to do anything when it comes to targeting multiple things, it's going to be incredibly difficult for them to do so. So yeah, Hinata Crown of Dawn is incredibly powerful and in my opinion, again, pretty broken. Regardless, it is a very unique and exciting card, and speaking of exciting cards, make sure and look out for even more exciting spoilers coming up on this channel. And with that, this show is coming to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what your thoughts on this episode are, and as always, thanks again and have a good one.